Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Neeru Tandon, Associate Professor, VSSD College, Kanpur. We are dealing with the third paper, 19th Century English Literature. This module, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, has been written by Dr. Nidhi Arora. In this module, we will discuss Jane Austen as a novelist, her life, her style of writing novels, and the details regarding the beautiful novel Pride and Prejudice. As far as Jane Austen is concerned, she has been considered as a major novelist of 19th century England. She is termed sometimes as a domestic novelist. Sometimes it was told that she wrote about only those topics which were known to her. She depicted only those characters which she experienced in her life. She was a bright student since her childhood. She was taught by her father. She learned various languages, but she was an independent thinker and she decided that she will not marry only for the sake of marriage. Out of love, there is no scope for marrying a person. She had her views that she expressed freely in her novels. Jane Austen was born on December 16, 1775. The younger daughter of George Austen and Cassandra Austen was, like her father, a scholarly child. She had some knowledge of French and Italian languages as well. She had a lovable character and temperament. Henry Austen aptly said, I quote, "Her stature was of true elegance. Her complexion was of finest texture. It might with truth be said that her eloquent blood spoke through her modest cheeks. Her voice was extremely sweet. She delivered herself with fluency and precision." Unquote. Jane Austen died on 24th July 1817. Jane Austen started writing at the age of 16, but she was a perfectionist. She write, but she will not produce it at that time. She was in the habit of maturing it. She was in the habit of correcting it. She spent 27 years on her 6 novels, as after finishing each novel, constantly revising them and then sparing many more months to rewrite before publication. This the reason that the final version of her novels have perfection. The major 6 novels written by her, Sense and Sensibility, published in 1811, Pride and Prejudice, published in 1813, Mansfield Park, again published in 1813, Emma, which was published in 1815, Northanger Abbey in 1817, and the last novel, Persuasion, got published in 1817 too. Jane Austen, as a novelist, dealt with her characters and developed them with the help of her dialogues. She represented the society in the forms of a social group, which is formed to resolve the matrimonial complexities. In the advancement of the plot, she represented the misunderstandings and frustrations. She just increased the audience's curiosity into intense relations and episodes. The presentation of the society in the form of parties, shopping, dances, full of humor and irony is very interesting to go through. She presented them with a complete perfection, but absence of any villain make her novels more important for readers. Jane Austen is the product of the Transitional period. which intervenes between the ideal of the 18th century and 19th century. On the whole, she belongs more to the 19th than to the 18th century. There are some factors where you can call her that she belongs to 18th century. The first one is her indifference to nature. We all know that depiction of nature is an important trait of Romanticism. But Jane Austen never paid her attention towards the depiction of nature. So in this way, she was more like Pope than like Wordsworth, and she was just inheriting this 18th century society and did not represent nature well. She was interested only in the depiction of her sex, female, and so far male were concerned, they were depicted if they were the object of interest to women. Another 18th century feature in her novel is the absence from her pages of characters drawn from humble life. We all know that 18th century literature, it dealt with aristocratic society, it deals with beaux, it deals with Madonnas, while 19th century literature was the literature of the common man. What she did, that she depicted mostly the upper class society or the middle class, mostly the higher middle class. The problems of the lower class society was not touched upon by her. She completely leaves out the poor and destitutes and confines herself exclusively to country, gentry and upper middle class. She is entirely of the 19th century in her treatment of characters. Jane is attracted by the naturalness and reality in speech and behavior of the persons. They think, speak and act as real human beings do. Her portraits are remarkable for their finish, their closeness to human nature. Secondly, though in her words pathos is lacking and passion of a deep, overwhelming kind is treated, we have a constant play of humor. Let us talk about her second novel, Pride and Prejudice. The plot of the novel is well knit and organic. The sequence of events is logical and inevitable. She shows her skill in the handling of events. The structure of Pride and Prejudice is dramatic. Characters are also developed through dialogues, and the plot is compound, it is not simple. All these different things are woven together very skillfully by Jane Austen. The complete nature of the plot undertakes emotion, and novel has little action. Her plots are well knit and organic plot. When I say that well knit and organic plot is a beauty of any novel, then this applies to Pride and Prejudice as well. In this novel, there are very little superfluous scene or characters. In this novel, with the possible exception of Kitty and Mary, there is no other character, no event that may be called superfluous, or that does not contribute to the development of the story. Even the comic proposal to Elizabeth of Mr. Collins has its own significance. It highlights the character of the heroine and shows her in favorable light. Now, mostly Pride and Prejudice has been referred as a social comedy. Why? The question is why as a social comedy? It is comedy because whatever is being presented, it has got sparks of humor and it is in the light shades. But why social? Because interpretation of social life in terms of comedy is there. The presentation of middle class social life is there in the novel, which attracts people. Life of aristocracy and military life is also there. Limitations of picture financial motivation is there, materialism has been treated with irony. The Lucases, Wickham and Lady Deborah, they have got a comic figure to be presented by the novelist. For any novel, characterization is solely responsible for its popularity. Jane Austen's art of characterization was praised by many because of the variety and abundance of characters, narrow canvas but great variety, characters drawn in their private capacity, vitality of her characters, their complexity and their many-sidedness is there to be enjoyed. The foolish and vulgar are transformed by sense of humor. Round and straight, both type of characters are there. Her female characters are developed fully and very interesting and independent. Use of dramatic methods can be noted and exaggeration of the absurd is there. Jane Austen very skillfully shows that events can be handled and which now follow in quick succession, resulting in the deepening of Elizabeth's prejudice and the awakening of Darcy's love for her. Gradually, the conflict between pride and prejudice weakens Darcy and makes his proposal to Elizabeth at once rejected. Now, what critics have to say on Pride and Prejudice? Like Richard Whatley, I quote, "We know not whether Miss Austen ever had access to precepts of fiction who have illustrated them more successfully," unquote. Walter Scott said, "The kind of moral also which these novels inculcate applies equally to the paths of common life," unquote. Jane Austen likewise often uses irony as a stylistic device and for quite unironic purposes to fly, to poke fun, to underline a decided judgment when there is no real contradiction involved. Pride and Prejudice and Emma are Jane Austen's great novels. When you just talk about her art of characterization, plot and techniques, we can just sum up that the whole plot of Pride and Prejudice revolves around the theme of marriage. Jane Austen is said to be a founder of domestic novel, and all of her 6 novels are against the social background but focus on domestic problems. We have discussed that plot of the novel is compound. It is not simple. Why it is compound? Because it has various plot and subplots. There are several pairs of lovers. The novel consists of subplots like love of Darcy and Elizabeth, that is the main plot, but love of Jane and Bingley is subplot. Love of Lydia and Wickham is an episode. Love of Collins and Charlotte, that is another episode. All these different threads are woven together so nicely that you never feel as a reader that the story is moving in another direction. The subplot serves as a foil to the main plot. Jane and Bingley are passionate lovers as constructed with the active love of Elizabeth and Darcy. Bingley's sudden departure for London from Netherfield heightens Elizabeth's prejudice towards Darcy, for she considers him responsible for the misery of her sister. The subplot, which remains at the front in the beginning, is pushed into the background when the main plot starts. In the same way, we cannot ignore the Lydia Wickham episode. The elopement of Lydia and Wickham gives a push to the story. It adds the element of melodrama. It also highlights the essential mobility of Darcy and helps to dispel the prejudice of Elizabeth. It brings Darcy's real character in front of readers as well as in front of Elizabeth. The comic proposal of Collins imparts the dramatic relief. His marriage with Charlotte resolves in Elizabeth's visit to Hunsford, where she comes to know more about Darcy, and prejudice weakens. Thus, there are no loose ends and all the parts have been well fused into single compact whole. Now, Pride and Prejudice, why do we call it a novel of conversation and little action? Yes, of course. It is said that like all the other novels of Jane Austen, there is not much action to be noted. Whatever action there is, it is trivial and commonplace. It consists merely of little visits, shopping, expedition, dinners, dance parties, tea parties, card playing, and the like. Although these actions are trivial and insignificant, yet with her executed touch, it is transformed to the uncommon and significant. The novel is the novel of common, everyday situations. It is the apotheosis of the commonplace. As a social comedy, Pride and Prejudice reads the mind of the characters. Jane Austen has studied the actions and reactions of the people within this narrow limits. It is a comedy because Jane Austen has exposed the foibles, the follies and the absurdities inherent in the life and character of these people. Their life is a round of visiting, playing cards, singing, going to dinners, inviting people to dinners. The petty jealousies, rivalries, doubts which beset this narrow and confined life have been skillfully exposed by the novelist. Our novelist is well versed with this kind of life. Around her, she has experienced as a first person and realized the inside story of this kind of life. That's why she's successfully presenting this life, successfully just delineating and portraying this kind of life in her novels. Novelist has not failed to provide us with glimpses of the life of aristocracy. Actually, she tried to give you a glimpse of all the three stairs, like aristocratic life has been presented by Lady de Bourgh as an aristocrat, proud, arrogant and insolent. She lives an artificial life of pomp and show and likes to display her wealth and splendor. She has nothing to do and finds diversion in taking rides in her carriage, listening to the piano or inviting people to dinner. The middle class life has been depicted by the life of Collins. They have nothing much to do and depend for their living in the patronage of the great whom they flatter in season and out of season. Similarly, through the flirtation of Lydia and Catherine with the military officers, we can form an idea of their social life. Now, another important thing that cannot be ignored is the materialism. Jane Austen talks about money. Jane Austen talks about materialistic viewpoint of women, not only women but men as well. The sole concern of a mother of getting her daughters married to rich and wealthy people is emphasized. The basis of social relations in Pride and Prejudice is economic, and Jane Austen has exposed it with an ironic smile. She considers Bingley an excellent match for Jane, not for any other consideration, but solely because he has a large fortune. What is the opening line of Pride and Prejudice matches with this? Jane Austen said, I quote, "A single man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year, what a fine thing for our girls." This was said by the mother. She considers the absurd Mr. Collins a suitable match for her sensible and cultured Elizabeth, merely because he can provide her with a comfortable home. Jane Austen has presented her stories in a narrow canvas, but still she managed to produce a great variety. All her characters are drawn from the upper middle class or landed gentry in a provincial village. There is no doubt that she paints on a narrow canvas, but this does not mean that her range is low. As a matter of fact, her range is very vast. In her 6 books, she never repeats a single character. Fine shades of characters are skillfully brought out. No two flirts, no two snobs, no two fools are alike. The folly of the foolish and the villainy of the wicked are sharply distinguished. Mrs. Bennet, Mr. Collins, and Lady de Bourgh are 3 figures of fun in the same novel, but how different they are from each other. There lies the character, the characteristic of the novelist. Her characters are round as well as straight. Jane Austen's grasp of human psychology enables her to conceive her characters in the round. Her characters are not flat. They change, they grow with the growing circumstances, with the stress, and become different from what they were in the beginning. Thus Darcy undergoes a sea change, and Elizabeth too is much altered. Even Mr. Bennet is shaken out of his complacency. However, this applies only to the principal figures. The minor ones are not modified by circumstances. Maybe Jane Austen never tried to modify them. Mr. Collins is a straight character. He remains the same from the beginning till the end. In this manner, Lydia, Kitty, Mary, they also never change, never grow. Whenever we talk about women characters of Jane Austen, we should take care that her women characters are drawn rather painted in a beautiful way. They are more memorable than her male characters because her male characters are also painted from the point of view of women. Now, dramatic methods used by Jane Austen are very, very important because they enrich the novel. Her method of character delineation is developed through short scenes in dialogues. The soliloquies presented also enrich the dramatic methods of Jane Austen. Soliloquy of Elizabeth after receiving Darcy's letter of explanation is a remarkable piece of character analysis. A quick recap of the main points. Pride and Prejudice is the second novel of Jane Austen, which was published in 1813. This is the most prevalent novel of Jane Austen. The heroine of the novel is Elizabeth, hero is Darcy. Story is all about Mr. and Mrs. Bennet's 5 daughters, Jane, Elizabeth, Kitty, Mary and Lydia. And it also talks about the mother's concern about getting her daughters married as soon as possible to the wealthy men. Another important family in the novel is of Mr. and Mrs. Lucas and their daughter Charlotte and Maria. The short time arrival of Mr. Bingley along with Mr. Darcy brings the excitement in the small town. They were considered as suitable matches for their girls. Jane danced with Mr. Bingley, but Elizabeth develops prejudice against Darcy because Darcy represents pride, and this shows pride and prejudice of the major characters. Bingley goes back to London. Jane visits to her maternal uncle Mr. Gardiner in London, and there she comes to know about the real character of Mr. Darcy, and her prejudice weakens and Darcy's pride vanishes. Darcy already told Elizabeth that Wickham had tried to abduct his sister Georgiana. Elizabeth now realized her mistake. In the meantime, Lady Catherine de Bourgh wanted to marry Darcy, and she tries to persuade Elizabeth not to marry Darcy. At last, Elizabeth is just forsakes her prejudices and is married to Darcy. Jane is married to Bingley. All these marriage bells, they make the plot complete. The whole plot, which revolves around the theme of marriage, finds its destination. So all of her 6 novels set against the social background, but they focus on domestic problems. To sum up, I will use the opening sentence of the novel. Jane Austen said, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." How true. That shows the social construct, that shows the importance of marriage in the life and in the society, in every age. Now, what are the complexities involved in this particular social stigma that one must get married? We all know that Jane Austen decided for herself that she will remain a spinster because she was not ready to marry for the sake of wealth or social status. Without love, there was no concern of marriage for her. As far as a novelist is concerned, Jane Austen, it was said that she remained in her 2 inches of ivory. 2 inches of ivory meant that her delineation, her area was very small, that she talked about only those issues of which she had the personal experience. She talked that domestic problems, the marriage, the love relationship, the episode of Wickham, like elopement of girls, that is all everybody wanted to go through. And she presented all those things in a beautiful way and made this novel a grand success. Jane Austen as a novelist has touched upon the heart. She was not a feminist, but she presented the cause of girls, the psychology of a girl in particular situation where her fate was just marriage or the procreation. How she felt, that was very nicely predicted and painted as if the word picture by Jane Austen. So keep reading. Thank you for visiting EPG Pathshala.